Hey guys, thank you so much for stopping by the garden today. I want to do a little video for you on the type of nutrients I use throughout the garden and what I've been using them on. Now, we have Dyna-gro here on the left, Dyna-gro Grow, which is a grow type nutrients for leafy growth. You can see it's high in the nitrogen, high in phosphorus and potassium, so it's got a 795. That's the one all the way to the left, which I bought a couple of years ago. I've been using Dyna-gro here in Central Florida for a good 6 years now. And then these two were from Dyna-gro. They sent us a little packet with these little bottles, these sample bottles. So I usually use bloom when we start switching to bloom nutrients. So during different stages, you're going to need different types of nutrients. As you can see, the bloom nutrients here has lower nitrogen, higher phosphorus, and potassium, because at that stage during the bloom, you want more phosphorus and potassium, and you want the nitrogen dropped off. But for plants like this polyelephant ear, that lavender down there, succulents, regular houseplants, bamboos, you want to use a grow on them. Herbs, any type of herb, because you're not growing it for the flower or produce. Now this orchid, we're going to use grow up until we see these bloom stalks, and then we're going to switch it to Dyna-gro bloom so we can encourage all these beautiful blooms to be healthy and produce. Now I lost some on the end because I didn't switch her enough and I didn't feed her enough. So I just gave her some Mag Pro, which is the Dyna-gro system, and it's a deficiency fixer. This is that Mag Pro that they sent me, and I'm starting to use it for any plants I see struggling in the garden, along with in conjunction with my bloom nutrients. So we're just going to go around and talk about what we're using these nutrients on, the bloom and the grow nutrients. I love these. They work so good in the garden, and they're a really light nutrient system, which I really like because they don't build up too much salts in the soil, which in turn, you don't have to flush your plants out too much. Now for little seedlings like this is basil, so it's an herb just like my sage and lettuce, and lettuce and spinach we grow for the leafy growth, and then you want to feed it grow all the way up until the end of its life stage. So basil, sage, lavender, you want to give grow up until it blooms. And if you want to encourage those blooms, you can definitely switch over to the bloom. Basil is an annual, so you're going to grow it just for the leafy growth, just like your greens. This Citronella is for leafy growth. She doesn't bloom. You can see just how big she's been getting. I got to transplant her, and all her foliage is starting to push out on the sides. You can see all that great foliage pushing out because we're giving her a grow. We're pruning the plant as she grows, making sure we have all these leaves out of the way. You can see that center stalk right there. I want to make sure no leaves are hanging over, because then this stalk can't shoot up like this one did. We removed some foliage on it a couple of weeks ago, and you can see just how big she's been branching out and getting. So we have to transplant her, but all she's getting is grow once every few weeks, and then I top off with a fresh compost in my soil once every 3 weeks or so to a month. That Nephitis gets grow because she has no blooms at all throughout her whole life, so we'll just give it some grow. That sage, we just give grow throughout its whole life, along with the spinach right there in the front too. Now that marigold down there, we definitely need to give that some bloom because we just started seeing blooms on her, and when you first plant her, you definitely want to give her some grow nutrients up until you start seeing these blooms. Then when you see those blooms, that's when you want to start giving the bloom nutrients, because you're going to encourage those blooms to bloom out, stay healthy. And this is just a little petite orange marigold, so they stay pretty small. We're going to transplant her out in the garden in a few weeks. That little lavender, we're giving grow throughout its whole life until it flowers. And then lavender, I like to switch to bloom once it flowers. So you just got to keep an eye on your plants, and they'll let you know when it's time to bloom them out and show you some produce. We're going to go out in the garden and take a look at some things. Alright you guys, so we're at the Blackberry right here, and you can see we have blooms everywhere. So we're starting to give her bloom nutrients once every 2 weeks, and then I top off with some fresh compost in the soil or some raised bed mix, some organic raised bed mix. You want to put an inch down. That's why I always leave a rim at the top of my pots. And then we're giving her pH down because her soil pH was actually at a 7.5 because it's been raining quite a bit. So last week we had rain, and when it rains, your soil turns alkaline. So berries really like an acidic soil. That pH down is going to bring your soil pH all the way down to where it needs to be. Just like tomatoes, they like to be at a 6. About a 6 to a 7. 6.5 is good. And we just want to bring the pH down. pH is so important, and having a pH tester, a 3-way pH tester, I'll post that video down below on the type of pH tester I use. We did a video on it. This way you guys can see exactly how to test the soil pH and then adjust accordingly. So if your pH is too low, let's say your pH is at a 5 for tomatoes, you know, that's a little too low for tomatoes, so you're going to have to bring that pH up. So they have pH up and down you can use. This raspberry's doing really well. We trimmed her up, pushing out side branches, looking good. Trimmed some of that bottom foliage off because it started dying off, getting a little yellow. And I just kind of spaced her out a little bit. You can see I tied those 3 branches up on the sides of the cage. She has nice room to grow now. Her leaves won't start dying off because all that sun is able to get in the leaves. You want sun exposure throughout all these leaves right here. These carrots, we'll move on to the little carrots here. We got purple carrots growing in this little container. They're getting pretty big, starting to pop out. They're just not ready yet. We'll go ahead, pick this little guy, because when your carrots are really close like this, carrots only get grow nutrients throughout their whole life because they don't have a bloom on them. But when you get carrots to grow so close together like this, they tend not to grow too well because they're fighting for space. This guy doesn't look too bad. So we'll go ahead, harvest him, wash him up, put him in a salad or some dinner. Then we'll let the rest of these little guys grow and get big, and we'll be picking them in a few weeks. They should all be ready in a few weeks. And carrots need a lot of foliage to grow, so they only grow for the carrot underneath the ground, which in turn, you know, you need a lot of foliage to produce that vegetable underneath the soil, just like potatoes. Broccoli is the same thing. It produces the head up top of the soil, so you need regular grow nutrients throughout their whole life. These guys don't get bloom. Now for this tomato, they get the bloom nutrients. So anything blooming, you want to give that Dyna-gro bloom. The coleus here, bloom. That eggplant, she's not big yet, so she's really small. This is a lot smaller than my other eggplant we have over on the other side of the garden. And we're just giving this little guy grow nutrients right now once every 2 weeks, and then we're topping off with fresh compost once every 3 weeks. And we're watching the pH. So pH for my eggplant, I usually like to keep at a 6, 6.5. And I'll show you the eggplant with the flower on her so we can show you when to switch to bloom. Alright you guys, so this is my other eggplant, growing really well. She's starting to bloom. That bloom actually fell off and pollinated itself, and now we have a nice eggplant growing out of the center of it. So we're going to switch this to bloom nutrients, and you can see ever since we did that, she's pushing out more blooms all up top. So we should get about 4 eggplant per plant for this Black Beauty eggplant that we're growing vertically. We'll come back to this little guy over here. So this little guy, he's going to start pushing out blooms pretty soon. And as soon as you see that bloom popping out of that top, which this is where it'll come out of, right out of that new growth, out of the top, then you can switch it over to the bloom nutrients. You want to give your plant a nice water, try to flush out a little bit of that grow nutrients from the salt buildup. So nutrients really have like salts in them that build up over time. So every month or so, I like to kind of flush my containers out a little bit, but not too much, because you don't want to flush all those nutrients out of your containers. Just like when you water, you want to water a little bit at a time. You don't want to let that water run out all the way to the bottom and keep pouring out of there, because you're going to flush out all the nutrients you work so hard to put in there. But you do want to flush out just a little bit, let it run through for about 30 seconds, then you can let it be, switch to your bloom nutrients, and you'll be good to go. You know them salts are washed out of there, and it's going to be switching to bloom. This way it's not confused having the grow for so long and then going and switching to the bloom right away. You want to have that little break in between, let it suck up that water, nothing but water for a day or so, and then you can go ahead and switch to that bloom nutrients. I hope this video helps you guys in the best way possible to just switch your plants over, use the correct nutrients on the different plants you're growing throughout the garden. Thank you so much for being here. If you need any help, please comment below. I'm here for you in any way possible. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I'll see you next time out in the garden. Bye-bye.